Let's talk about a world being completely remade, not by war, but by machines. That was Europe in the 19th century. Today, we're digging into how the Industrial Revolution didn't just build factories. It forged a new world of winners and losers, a divide that, believe it or not, still shapes our world today.
To really get this divide, you just have to look at this stark contrast. On one side, you have Britain's Crystal Palace from 1851, a massive, glittering cathedral of glass and steel, so huge they had actual full-size trees growing inside. It was basically a declaration of industrial power. But then you look to the right, and at almost the exact same time, you see the horrifying reality of the Irish potato famine. We're not talking about different centuries here. These were two sides of the same continent, living in completely different realities. So how on earth did Europe get so divided?
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to trace the three different paths that led to this chasm. First up, we'll look at Britain, the trailblazer. Then, we'll hop across the channel to see France's more cautious, state-led strategy. After that, we'll dig into why so much of Europe got left behind, practically anchored in the past. And finally, we'll see how all these different paths created a whole new map of power, what's called the Great Divergence.
Okay, let's start with the pioneer, Great Britain. You know, they weren't just the first ones to the party, they literally wrote the blueprint for how to do it, becoming the undisputed economic heavyweight champion of the 19th century.
So, what was Britain's secret sauce? Well, it really boiled down to four key ingredients. First, just look at their geography. They were sitting on a mountain of coal and iron, with canals and rivers to move it all around. Super convenient. Second, they had the money. Wealthy entrepreneurs were just itching to invest, and they had a central bank to back them up. Third, their government was actually on board. Parliament was way more interested in helping business than propping up old-school nobility. And finally, they had customers, a massive global empire that was hungry for all the goods they could possibly make. And this whole process got kicked into overdrive by a few killer inventions. Take Hargreaves' spinning jenny. It totally revolutionized how they made textiles, making it unbelievably faster. But the real game changer, the engine of the whole revolution, was James Watt's steam engine. This wasn't just some clever machine. It was the power source for the entire factory system, and it ran on all that coal Britain had just lying around. And that feeling of just total dominance, it's perfectly captured by the Crystal Palace. This quote really says it all. This building wasn't just an exhibition hall. It was a powerful, almost arrogant statement to the entire world that Britain, with its technology and its money, had bent the natural world to its will.
All right, now let's cross the English Channel and take a look at our second case study, France. The French saw Britain's industrial explosion and they thought, okay, we're going to do this a little differently. They chose a slower, more planned, and way more state-controlled path to getting modern. And the key concept to really understand here is state sponsorship. This is pretty much the polar opposite of Britain's free-for-all capitalism. See, in France, it wasn't a bunch of private entrepreneurs leading the charge. It was the government. The state was ponying up the cash for the big infrastructure projects and basically steering the ship of industrial development.
And this lays out that fundamental difference perfectly. Britain's industrialization was bottom-up. It was driven by thousands of individual inventors and business owners, all chasing a profit. France's approach, on the other hand, was totally top-down. It was a strategic national project, carefully planned and guided by the government in Paris.
Now, why the different approach? Well, France just wasn't as lucky as Britain when it came to natural resources. They didn't have those huge, easy-to-reach deposits of coal and iron. So the state had to step in and compensate. Huge government projects, like the Quentin Canal to link Paris to industrial zones, and a nationally funded railway system. These were absolutely essential to make up for those geographical disadvantages.
So now we turn to the rest of the continent, to the places that didn't take off. For huge regions in Eastern and Southern Europe, it was like they were held in place by these massive, heavy anchors, just preventing them from moving into the industrial age at all. So what were these anchors holding them back? Well, there were three big ones. First, a simple lack of stuff. No coal, no iron, well, no industrial revolution. It's kind of hard to build factories without the raw materials. Second, you had serious social resistance. The powerful landed nobility, the old aristocracy, saw factories as a huge threat to their traditional power. And third, especially in places like Russia, you had serfdom. You can't exactly build a modern factory workforce when all your potential workers are legally tied to the land they were born on.
And the real-world consequence of being held back like this became devastatingly clear during the Hungry 40s. When crops failed across Europe for a decade, these non-industrialized nations had no safety net. They were completely reliant on agriculture, and when that collapsed, well, everything collapsed.
And that brings us right back to the tragic reality of Ireland. During the potato famine, over 1 million people died. Just let that number sink in. 1 million. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a man-made one, made so much worse by a system that had completely failed to modernize and build a more resilient economy.
So what you have are these three very different paths: pioneering, planning, and just stagnating. And all of this led to what historians call the Great Divergence. It fundamentally redrew the map of Europe, not with new borders on paper, but with new invisible lines of wealth and power that would define the future.
So what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? It's that the path a nation took back in the 19th century, based on its resources, its government, its social setup, that wasn't just some short-term thing. It literally set its economic destiny for generations, creating deep divides that would last for more than a century. And that leaves us with one final, big question to chew on. When we look at our world today, the global north versus the global south, the deep lines between wealth and poverty, you really have to ask, how much of that is just an echo of this uneven revolution that all started with a steam engine 2 centuries ago?